入しようぜ。
オッケー。
行こう行こう。お前ら今日はやったよ。
任しとけ。
セガと三四郎。通れ。そうだよ。
セガタ三四郎。
セガサターンしろ。
Yo, what's good YouTube? It's your boy Margo the Samurai, the Shogun with the slogan, and if you don't know where it's been, you don't know where it's going. And I am back with another video. Now today, we will be talking about one of gaming's most ill-fated but greatest consoles, the Sega Saturn. So people, strap yourselves in for this gaming history. Ah yes people, the Sega jingle. A sweet sound once synonymous with victory, but is now only synonymous with decay and despair. But back in the near prehistoric age of 1995, Sega attempted to bring us past the gaming hemisphere into the realm of the Sega Saturn. And what a time it was, people. Now, even though the Sega Saturn was one of the most innovative and potentially powerful gaming consoles of that age, at that time the system came under heavy fire and pretty much single-handedly undone all the success and hard work of the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive in the previous generation. So today we're going to pretty much look at what went wrong and why every die-hard Sega fan should probably hate Virtua Fighter's guts as much as AIDS or the new Ghostbusters movie. Take your pick. Back to the 90s, an age of gaming before
Content, home of Xbox. Entertainment comes alive, more intelligent, casual games, hardware, software and services.
At the time, Sega was the only company to prove itself a worthy rival to Nintendo, and they had the majority of the home console 16-bit market. But with the 32-bit era readily approaching, Sega found themselves a little bit at odds and confused about which direction they should next take. Nintendo, through releasing games like the original Star Fox, Stunt Race FX, and Donkey Kong Country, had started to see more Super Nintendo sales and even start to claw some market share back. Sega of America, believing that there was still a lot of life in the Genesis, decided to develop the 32X, an add-on that would give it sub-32 powers and prolong the life of the system. Meanwhile, Sega of Japan was like, fuck that, we're making this shit. Now, despite the Mega Drive's overall success in the West, the initial good sales of the 32X, and the fact that Sega of Japan even previously promised to support the console, they abandoned it and focused all their efforts and resources on the Sega Saturn. And because they were the head honchos in charge, Sega of America and Europe had to follow, essentially killing the 32X and all momentum it could have had instantly. Now, the Sega Saturn's hardware is legendary for being one of the first console systems to form a love or hate relationship with its developer. Now, at the time, the Sega Saturn was very advanced, and due to the fact that it had multiple main processors, most developers couldn't get the most out of it. Pretty similar in architecture and makeup to the PlayStation 3, but unlike our beloved PlayStation Triple, Sega's hardware decisions would actually be one of the major downfalls of the console itself. Now, before the overall hardware for the Sega Saturn was completely finalized, then head honcho of Sega America, Tom Kalinske, the guy responsible for the overall success of the Sega brand in the West, teamed up with Sony head Olaf Eriksson and Ken Kutaragi the father of the PlayStation, to create a 3D engine that would be the heart of the next Sega console. And my lord, it was a beast. Sony would supply some of the funding, Sega would have the credibility and much needed brand recognition, and together they would take down and take on Nintendo. Oh, but Sega of Japan quickly shot that idea down. God damn it, Sega of Japan! On November 22nd, 1994 in Japan, the Sega Saturn triumphantly launched and sold all of its inventory of 200,000 consoles on day one. This was thanks to an uncanny conversion of the AM2 arcade hit Virtua Fighter, which sold at a nearly 1-to-1 rate with each console. This feat prompted Sega into the boss move of delaying their second shipment of consoles until the release date of the PlayStation, just so they could outsell them again. Boss! And even though certain games experienced issues due to being rushed to meet demand, by the end of 1995, Sega had sold 500,000 Saturn consoles, while the PlayStation had only sold 300,000. Drunk on both sake and success, in March 1995, Sega announced their plans to once again take over the Western console market with the invention of the quite coolly named Sega Saturn Day. The idea of Sega tying in their launch date and their console's name was a brilliant idea for marketing. Saturday the 2nd of September. Giving Sega enough time to build hype for the console, work with retailers, and make sure there's enough games ready for launch so they don't have the same problem that they had with the Japanese launch. The marketing and strategy of Saturn Day was an awesome idea. An awesome idea that would actually never come to fruition because Sega of Japan got cold feet because of the release of the Sony PlayStation and therefore forced Sega of America to release the console 4 months early with no marketing. Boss! Sega also managed to undership consoles to the US, meaning that not all retailers could get some, so whoever didn't instantly became enraged at Sega, meaning that big retailers like the likes of Best Buy ended up dropping Sega and Saturn from their lineup. And with Sega Europe launching ahead of Saturn Day with no press or marketing on July 8th, Sega ultimately screwed any chance of the Saturn's success. Even though Sega had established a strong foothold in Japan, it seems that they couldn't replicate the same kind of success in the West. And whatever sales Sega attained by releasing early were quickly eclipsed by Sony due to their hugely superior marketing campaign and their much wider launch library, which due to the games not being rushed, demonstrated not only the PlayStation's power but the Sega Saturn's weaknesses. And due to the fact that most developers weren't used to the technologically advanced nature of the Sega Saturn's hardware, 3D games released on both Sega Saturn and PlayStation tended to look better on Sony's console, providing yet a further advert for why you should have bought a PlayStation back in '95. It actually wasn't until later on that year when Sega started releasing their big arcade hits like Virtua Fighter 2 and Sega Rally until people started taking notice of the Sega Saturn. One of Sega's few positive turning points in that whole console generation, Virtua Fighter 2 stands as a testament to true console engineering, pushing the limits of the hardware to provide a 60 frame per second, yes you heard it, 60 frame per second version of the arcade hit. Even though the console itself wasn't capable of running full Model 2 visuals, the game still managed to run in the Sega Saturn's high resolution mode. This game was actually a master showpiece for the Sega Saturn back in 1995, and it was definitely one of the reasons why the Saturn was being able to sell consistently in Japan alongside the PlayStation when it began to actually get more popular. Now, even though Virtua Fighter was a huge hit in Japan, it wasn't that much of a huge hit in the West, and Sega wanted it to be a hit in the West. And because of this, Sega put one of their biggest franchises at the time on hold indefinitely. Because Sega felt that Eternal Champions was holding back Virtua Fighter from being more successful in Europe and America, Sega made sure that there was no more further development, conception, or anything to do with this franchise. In Japan, the franchise was all but buried and never spoken of, and the Sega Saturn version of the game that was in development was cancelled. Oh, damn it, Sega of Japan! Damn you! Gee. Even though the absence of a Sonic the Hedgehog game hurt the Saturn, we definitely still were treated to an awesome experience with Knights, which truly has to be played to even explain or believe it. And games like Tomb Raider, which was actually developed for the Sega Saturn as an exclusive, but due to the popularity of the PlayStation, was forced to be ported over to their console. Which is kind of a shame, because things could have been different if it stayed exclusive. Regardless, Sega continued to bring home their action-packed arcade content, which could have kept the Sega Saturn in the game for longer as far as the West is concerned if the arcade technology wasn't outpacing the home console market so quickly, and especially due to the hardware decisions they made before, bringing games like Virtua Fighter 3 and the likes home seemed like an almost impossible task without making some expensive concessions. Even though the Sega Saturn is one of history's most often misunderstood and misrepresented consoles, it's still home to tons of classic games that you can play nowhere else. From 2D to 3D games, the Sega Saturn has you covered. And unlike the first Sony PlayStation, the Sega Saturn has a ton of hardware that's aged really well in terms of gameplay, graphics, and collecting, with some games fetching up to thousands of dollars or thousands of pounds just for a copy. Games like Radiant Silvergun, X-Men vs Street Fighter, Panzer Dragoon Saga, and even the Sega Saturn version of Dead or Alive, which was pretty much arcade perfect, take a few backgrounds and some graphics here and there, and yeah, the Sega Saturn library has a ton of collectible games to offer. And to tell the truth, at that time, the best thing a developer could do was bring that arcade experience home. And there was no console that could bring that arcade experience home like the Sega Saturn, baby. Oh yeah. Well people, that was it for Gaming History 411. Hope you enjoyed that inaugural episode. Make sure you like, subscribe and comment. Come back for more when I'll be showing you my Sega Saturn collection and games. Peace!